What is up, everyone? I hope you're all having a great day. Now, today I want to talk about what I think is one of the easiest temperate fish to keep. Possibly one of the easiest fish, full stop, to be honest. And I used to get it loads in the shop where people would walk in on a daily basis saying, I'm here to get some goldfish for my kid's new fish tank. And I promise you, unless you're a seasoned fish keeper, you are going to live to regret that decision. These guys are far, far easier than a goldfish. Now, you would have already seen it in the thumbnail, but today we are here to talk about the white cloud mountain minnow. Now, these have been a staple fish in the aquarium hobby for a long, long time. And it's probably due to their hardiness, their colour, their activity, and the fact that you don't need to run a heater with them in most situations. Now, before I get into how to keep these and setting up things and stuff, a random little fact I love about them is their Latin or scientific name, which is Tanichthyes albanubes. Now, weirdly, obviously, ichthyes, the second part of their first name, that means fish. Tan is actually, well, that's the person who's discovered the name. In the 1930s, I think, if I remember rightly, he was a scout leader. And yeah, they found these fish up in the mountains in China and they named them after him. So essentially it's Tanichthyes, Tan's fish, and, well, I suppose the other part, albanubes, is alba, white, and nubes is cloud. So white cloud, Tan's fish, white cloud. Just thought that was a proper little random bit of info that I love about these fish. But that's enough random information on these. Let's get into how to keep them, where they come from, how to set up a tank for them, and all that other info. Now, these minnows originally come from the mountainous regions in China, well, specifically the White Cloud Mountain regions in China. I think it's Guangdong province. I hope I said that right, and I hope I didn't offend anyone. Now, their natural habitat consists of cool, clear, flowing water. I've read reports of fairly fast-flowing water, and I've also read reports where they're sort of sticking into the sides and sitting in the backwaters so that it's not that fast-flowing. So it seems like they've adapted to a lot of different situations. Now, these areas are quite pebbly, quite rocky, a lot of open spaces and a fair amount of vegetation as well. So you can picture those nice clear mountain streams coming down through and a little group of these guys just buzzing around in there. Now, at one point there were fears that they weren't in the wild anymore. They were actually extinct because from about the 1980s, I think somewhere around the 1980s, for like 20 odd years, there were no reports of these fish in the wild where they were originally from. But luckily, a few reports have come out now and a few populations have been found in different areas. So hopefully the White Cloud Mountain minnow, as we know it, is out there in its native environment. And the cool thing is there are efforts being made to reintroduce these into certain areas. As always, it's humans that have normally caused the problems, and it's the same for these little guys. Human populations move in, and unfortunately the native environment takes a hit. And the good thing is they have been bred in the aquarium hobby for years, so none of the ones that you're going to see in your local fish shop are going to be wild, or I highly, highly doubt it. There are very few reports of exporting of these fish because they are so sparse in the wild. So you're not going to have any impact on their native environment or wild populations. These guys are always going to be tank bred, and well, the aquarium industry has essentially saved them for future generations. There are a lot of fish like that in the aquarium industry actually, where they're pretty much extinct or non-existent in the wild, and the only place you can see them is in the aquarium hobby. It's a really strange but amazing thing. Now, when it comes to setting up an aquarium for White Cloud Mountain minnows, to be honest, they are a very forgiving fish. As I've said, they've been bred in the aquarium hobby for so long that, well, they don't really know what their native environment looks like. For me, I personally like to have rocks and wood and lots of plants in there to give them hiding spaces and to make them feel secure. As with a lot of fish, the more hiding spaces you give them, the more you will see the fish because the more confident they feel. If there's a hiding space just behind them that they can dart into, they're going to come out into the aquarium and feel a lot more confident about it. Another thing that I've already mentioned is these fish are generally happier at cooler temperatures, so you shouldn't need to run a heater in there, and as long as you've got it somewhere in your house that, I don't know, isn't a shed and isn't going to get freezing cold over the winter, you'll be absolutely fine with them without a heater. We'll go into temperatures a little bit later in the video. When it comes to filtration though, they do like clean, clear water, so good filtration with a fair amount of oxygenation is a good thing to supply to them. I run an air stone in this tank just to add a little bit more oxygenation and a little bit more movement, and that, well, does them really well. As for the size of the aquarium, really a 60-ish litre aquarium would be my starting point. That will get you a good group of minnows in there. You probably could go smaller, but it's well worth, the bigger you can get, the easier and the better it is, which is what 60 litres is, what, 14, 15 gallons, I think, somewhere around that mark. So yeah, aim for that, and that'll be a good starting point, and you can probably get some other fish in with them. As I say, juveniles you could probably get away with less, but the more room you give them, the more they're going to show off, the more they're going to show their natural instincts and their natural behaviours, and the better they're going to look. So as I've previously mentioned with temperature, they are a fairly hardy fish and they can have a huge range of temperatures that they can live at. Now I probably should mention that in England, maybe the United Kingdom, I'm not sure on the rules and laws at the moment, but you aren't allowed to keep these fish outside. It's something to do with not selling the fish for outside fish keeping. Again, I've got to read through the laws properly, but there will be people in the comments, I'm sure, that keep them outside. If you're in different countries, then it might be absolutely fine. But I know at the moment in England, it certainly isn't. But anyway, temperatures. So I aim for an average. So around 14 degrees Celsius up to about, what, 22 degrees Celsius, which is 59 Fahrenheit to 71 Fahrenheit. Would that make sense? 57 Fahrenheit, I reckon. Anyway, somewhere around there. But yeah, 14 to 22 degrees Celsius should be absolutely fine for them. They would definitely be able to live at cooler temperatures for short periods of time, and they would be able to live at hotter temperatures for a period of time. Obviously, where they come from in the wild isn't going to be one stable temperature all year long. There is going to be periods of slower moving water where they haven't had rain for a while and it might warm up a little bit. But I always aim for the middle because, well, you can't go wrong with the average, can you? Aim for the middle, you should be okay. Remember though, keeping them in hotter water will speed up their life cycle, will speed up their feeding, will make them go to the toilet more. And then obviously cooling them down will do the opposite, will slow them down, and they haven't got good fat reserves. They're not a big chunky fish, so keeping them at those cooler temperatures for long periods of time can cause problems. But I know there will be people in the comments like, I've kept them at 5 degrees in my garage for 30 years. Yeah, absolutely, and there will be cases like that. Actually, when researching this video, I read about a new population that was found that weren't as cold tolerant as other ones. I guess because they've been breeding in warmer water for a longer period of time. Yeah, they just weren't as cold tolerant when the scientists found them and not tested them, but yeah, checked them out. They weren't as cold tolerant, which is quite interesting. But yeah, anyway, 14 degrees Celsius, 22 degrees Celsius, somewhere in the middle, you should be absolutely perfect. With regards to water parameters, exactly the same thing. I have seen these fish being kept anywhere from like, what, 6 pH, all the way up to like a pH of 8. And doing absolutely fine. They are, again, an adaptable, very forgiving fish when it comes to keeping them in the aquarium. It's why I like them so much. They're colourful, they're interesting, and they are hardy. They're a great starter fish for a lot of people coming into the hobby. And it's the same with hardnesses. I really wouldn't worry that much. They've been bred in captivity for so long that generally, as long as it's not really extreme hard or really extreme soft, they seem to do really well. As for anything else in your water, your ammonias, your nitrites, your nitrates, your phosphates, I don't know, all the other pollutants that you can get in the water, again, 0 is your friend. Obviously, nitrate, you can go a little bit higher on and not worry so much, but certainly your ammonias, your nitrites, you're going to want to keep them at 0, really. These fish do prefer clean, clear, well-oxygenated water. But as long as you're providing them with a good filter, that should keep up with all of those wastes. And as long as you're doing your water changes and you've got some good growing plants in there, well, again, it should be a fairly easy setup for you to maintain. sizing wise, they're maxing out at around 4 centimetres. Females can get a little bit chunkier, not massive, but a little bit chunkier than males. But yeah, they are still maxing out around that 4 centimetre mark, which is what, 1.5 inches roughly. And again, it's another reason why I love these fish so much over some of their bigger cold water counterparts. I'm looking at you, goldfish. I don't know, it's just that stigma that's attached to goldfish, isn't it? I'm going to get my first fish and it's going to be a goldfish. No. I'm going to go get my first fish and it should be a white cloud mountain minnow, or a paradise fish, or, you know, any of the other cold water fish that are really hardy. But I do believe that these are one of the best. They are so small, they're easy to keep, they're able to keep in small tanks. Yeah, can you tell that I like white cloud mountain minnows a little bit now? So when you're deciding how many white cloud mountain minnows to get for your aquarium, obviously you've got to look at the size of your aquarium. I've got around 10 in this 60-litre aquarium, and I do have plans once they grow up to get them into a bigger aquarium, into more of a community setup, I suppose you would say. But as always with shoaling fish, the more the merrier. The more you can get in there, the better. So maybe start off by getting 5 or 6 into your aquarium, letting them settle for a few weeks and letting your filter maintain and build up to that amount of fish waste. And then once you've got that 5 or 6, maybe get another little group to go in there. It is something that I haven't discussed in this video yet, but there are other colour variants of these about. So these are the standard white cloud mountain minnow behind me. So they're that nice like bronzy colour, silvery stripe with the red tail. You can also get a gold variety, which is like a proper yellowy gold. Exactly the same care and health and everything. They're as hardy as these guys, just a slightly brighter and different colour. You can also see long-finned ones every now and again in the hobby. I've seen them a few times in my years. They're not quite as common, but you could do a mixture. You could get 5 gold, 5 normal, and 5 long-finned. It's really up to you. But the more you get in there, the better, and the more you will see them. Now, when choosing tank mates to go in with your white cloud mountain minnows, to be honest, there's a few little things to think about, and the main one is the temperature they're going to be living at. Obviously, if you've got a fish that's going to thrive between 14 and 22 degrees, again, there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but if you've got a fish that is going to survive between those marks, you don't want to then be introducing, I don't know, like rams or discus, because both those fish are going to require temperatures in the 26, 28, maybe even 30 degrees Celsius. So the crossover between these little guys trying to live at 22 happily, and your discus and rams trying to live at maybe 30 or 28 happily, isn't going to go down so well. So that's the first thing to bear in mind, is the temperature. But that's not to put you off from doing a cooler water aquarium. There are tons and tons of fish that you can keep in with them. If you're going for a pure cold water aquarium with no heater at all, things like your celestial peridanios, which are in this tank next door to them, they will generally drop in temperature to the lower temperatures like the white cloud mountain minnows, and they would be a really nice mix in a smaller aquarium. If you've got a slightly larger aquarium, then something like, well, where the camera is now underneath you, is my barb community aquarium, and they've got gold barbs in. The gold barbs do get a bit chunkier, but if you've got that bigger aquarium with enough hiding spaces and enough plants and things to go around, then the gold barbs could be like almost a focal point, and you could have a big shoal of minnows as your shoaling fish. There are tons and tons available, you know, not to mention zebradanios, paradise fish, pearl danios, the list goes on. There are hundreds of fish to choose from if you just want a pure, unheated cold water aquarium. Now, one thing you could do is you could run a heater in with them and just set it to their maximum. Set it to around the 20 to 22 degrees Celsius mark, set it there, and then you could keep some more like subtropical species in there. So a lot of your tetras, a lot of things like that will drop down to the 22 mark at their lowest bracket. So it'd be quite easy to work out a community where you're sort of somewhere in the middle. Like for instance, a neon tetra or maybe even a cherry barb would drop down to 22 degrees at their lowest at certain points of the year, and your minnows would be at the highest. So it's just looking through, working out which fish are going to be where. Take your information though from everywhere. Even when I'm doing these videos, I still look at what other people are recommending and what people are saying about it. And to be honest, I see numbers all over the place. In this video, I had temperatures from 8 degrees Celsius all the way up to about 28 degrees Celsius that people were saying to keep minnows in, they'd be fine. So that's why I always say fish keeping isn't one rule fits all. There are many different ways of doing it, many different things, and you've just got to find your way and work out what works for you. When it comes to catfish in the aquarium, again, there's a lot of Corydoras or Hopleosoma or Gastrio, whatever they're called now. Essentially, Corydoras has gone through a big name change and they've split up all the different species now into different groups. So I will call them Corydoras though. But yeah, Corydoras, there are a lot of species of Corydoras that will go down to those cooler temperatures as well. The three-lined Corys or Trilineatus will go down to a cooler temperature as well, so would be a good addition to the minnows. Another cool fish that you could mix in with them if you're running a bit of a higher flow in the aquarium is something like a hillstream loach. These little fish are like a little, I want to say slug. Stingray is probably a cooler thing, isn't it? They look like a little mini stingray and they'll just hoover around the aquarium, going over all the rocks. Obviously, as always, make sure you're putting some food in there, some sinking pellets, some algae wafers, things like that to keep the hillstream loaches happy. But yeah, they would be a really cool little fish, really peaceful, chilled out. One fish to mention, there is a fish called a sucking loach. Very cool when they're this big, not cool when they're this big, and they get quite violent, they're quite aggressive and very territorial. So just be careful, hillstream loach, not sucking loach. And just, yeah, do your research and make sure you get the right one. Lastly, on things that you could keep them with is shrimp. A lot of your Neocaridina, like cherry shrimps, would go down to temperatures that these guys would thrive at. So again, you could have a nice little population of shrimps helping you with the algae, helping you clean up the tank, and maybe getting a little bit of breeding from the shrimps as well. I've got plans that I'm going to put a little group of shrimp in here because the wood is getting a bit of biofilm on it now, and those shrimps will just absolutely love that. So yeah, shrimps would be a cool thing to look at as well. One thing I will mention before I move off from tank mates for white cloud mountain minnows is goldfish. Now, again, it's not a one rule fits all, unfortunately. Personally, I would keep them separate at all times. Juvenile goldfish and larger minnows probably get on absolutely fine because they won't get eaten. But once you start looking at the goldfish growing up and the minnows being trapped in the same sort of space, you may find that the minnows do become lunch. It's probably the nicest way of putting it. Again, there will be exceptions to the rules. I've seen people keeping them in large aquariums with a big shoal of minnows and a load of fancy goldfish. Obviously, the fancy varieties of goldfish don't swim as fast as your common, like, standard shaped goldfish. But again, personally, if you want to keep it happy and safe and no problems, then don't go mixing goldfish with the minnows. Certainly not in a tank this size. Again, maybe a 4 foot, maybe a 5 foot, you may get away with it, but it's always a risk. Feeding is probably one of the easiest things with the minnows, to be honest, and that is anything that they can fit in their mouths. I use a nice little fine granular food in here and they absolutely devour that all the time. It is the simplest thing with them. A little bit of frozen food, bloodworm, daphnia, things like that every now and again. A good quality granular food, maybe 2 or 3 different types to give them a variety, and away you go. As simple as that. Lastly, we come to breeding and sexing of the white cloud mountain minnows, and again, it is fairly simple and fairly easy. Sexing them, the females, once they reach maturity, will be a deeper, bigger fish. They're just a bit bulkier, and you'll be able to tell when they grow up. The males remain quite slim and a little bit smaller, so if you're looking at adults, you can tell them apart quite quickly. Juveniles, it's just getting a group and hoping that you get a mix, but you'd be very unlucky to get all males or all females. Now, they are an egg scattering fish, which means the female will go in, release eggs, and then the male will go in and fertilise them at the similar time sort of thing. So running a lot of fine-leaved plants or even making a couple of spawning mops for the aquarium is perfect because that means then they've got somewhere to lay those eggs. I'm probably going to end up putting a few floating plants in here because those trailing roots will be perfect for them to lay their eggs in. I don't necessarily want to breed them, but if it happens, it happens. Now, if you want the eggs and babies to survive, it's a good idea to remove that plant matter or even remove the parents from the aquarium and let those eggs sit in there until they hatch. If you're not worried about the babies, then just leave them to it. You may get a few survive in a heavily planted aquarium and the babies can hide away. You know, I wouldn't be surprised to see a few survive in here, to be fair, because of the dragonstone I'm running. There's loads of crevices and holes that the eggs could fall in, and then the parents might not get to them. But the eggs are fair game, and so will be the babies when they hatch. Depending on what temperature you're running the tank at, the eggs will normally hatch in 3 to 5 days. It really does vary on how warm and how quickly they hatch. But once they hatch, they're fairly easy to care for. A little bit of infusoria that you can make at home, which is like a fry food, or even crushed up granules, crushed up flake, anything that they'll eat and the babies will graze on, away you go. As they grow, increase the food size with them, and that's it. It's as simple as that. They seem to be a very easy fish to raise. There we go. I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive onto the white cloud mountain minnow. They are certainly up there now in one of my favourite fish. They're a proper aquarium classic, but they tick all of the boxes for what people should be getting into when they first start. Easy, hardy, cold water. Yeah, if we can get more people to succeed with a fish like this, more people will move on into the hobby for bigger and better, not better, no, bigger and more colourful and more interesting. No, not even more interesting. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking. Hope you found it useful, hope it's helped, and I will see you in the next one where I've got another 3 or 4 fish files to film today. So yeah, better start cracking on with that. See you in the next one.